What if I told you some of the most notorious criminals in Australia aren't just ordinary killers? They're the kind of people who make even hardened officers shake in their boots. From the backpacker killer to a man who went on a shooting rampage, these prisoners have left a mark on the world with their violent crimes. So, get ready as we dive into the stories of Australia's most dangerous inmates, the ones you really don't want to meet, inside or out. Number 10. This guy isn't your average criminal. He's the stuff of nightmares. McLeod is known as the backpacker killer, and for good reason. Between 1989 and 1992, he went on a gruesome killing spree, murdering at least 7 backpackers who were traveling through the Australian outback. It's hard to even wrap your head around how cold-blooded this guy was. McLeod lured his victims into his car, pretending to be a friendly guy offering a ride. But what awaited them was nothing short of horror. After abducting them, he would take them into the wilderness, torture them, and then kill them. And he didn't stop there. He dumped their bodies in remote forests, making sure they were as far out of reach as possible. What makes McLeod even more chilling is how long he managed to get away with it. For years, he was just another face in the crowd, blending in while he carried out his sickening crimes. It wasn't until 1994, after a huge investigation and a ton of DNA evidence, that he was finally caught. But here's the kicker. He was sentenced to life in prison, but McLeod still denies having any involvement in the murders. Even now, from his prison cell, he's got the whole innocent until proven guilty act going on. But let's be real, no one's buying it. Ivan McLeod is the definition of a true monster, and there's no denying that. Number 9, he's one of Australia's most notorious child killers. Back in 1992, Cowan was responsible for the horrific abduction and murder of a 13-year-old boy named Daniel Morecombe. Daniel had been waiting for a bus when Cowan, a complete stranger, lured him into his car. What happened next was every parent's worst nightmare. Cowan held Daniel captive, then murdered him in cold blood before hiding his body for years. It wasn't until 2011, nearly a decade after Daniel's disappearance, that Cowan was finally caught, thanks to a breakthrough in forensic evidence. The twist? Cowan had been living a seemingly normal life while his dark secret was buried deep. He was a family man, with a wife and kids, but behind closed doors, he was hiding his monstrous side. What makes Cowan's case even more chilling is the way he manipulated everyone around him. For years, he fooled investigators and even the people closest to him. But his facade crumbled when a tip-off led to his arrest. And in 2014, he was convicted of Daniel's murder. The court heard the brutal details of how Cowan had tricked Daniel into his vehicle and then ended his life in the most horrific way. Now, Brett Peter Cowan is serving a life sentence. And while he's behind bars, the haunting memory of his crime still lingers. He may have tried to hide his evil actions, but there's no escaping the truth. Number 8. Back in 1992, this guy went on a complete rampage, ending the lives of 6 people, including his own son. It all started when his ex-girlfriend moved on with a new man. A jealous rage took over, and Baker snapped. First, he shot his ex's new boyfriend, then his ex, and even her sister, who was pregnant. The killings didn't stop there. He even turned on his own son, suspecting him of being involved with his ex. This murderous spree didn't end until Baker had killed 6 people in total. He then went on the run, driving around for hours before finally giving himself up after confessing to a friend. His brutal actions earned him 6 life sentences, and he's spent decades locked away ever since. But here's where things get interesting. While behind bars, Baker's story took an unexpected turn. He was diagnosed as psychotic and spent years in solitary confinement, leading many to believe his actions were a result of untreated mental health issues. Despite his violent past, some people believe Baker's time behind bars should come to an end. He's 75 years old now, has suffered a stroke, and shows little to no risk of reoffending. Some even argue he deserves a chance at freedom after spending over 30 years in prison. But others, understandably, believe he's still dangerous. After all, if a man can kill his own flesh and blood in a fit of rage, could he snap again? Number 7, Christopher Dale Flanery, better known as the Man Who Disappeared, is one of Australia's most notorious criminals, and his story is anything but ordinary. Flanery was a feared hitman, known for his ruthlessness and his connections to the criminal underworld. In the 1980s, he became infamous for being involved in multiple murders, particularly as a part of the Sydney underworld's bloody turf wars. What makes Flanery's case so chilling is not just the lives he took, but the fact that he vanished without a trace. After a string of murders, Flanery became a wanted man by the police. But despite their efforts, he seemingly disappeared off the face of the earth. No one knows exactly what happened to him. Did he get a tip-off and flee the country? Was he killed by someone else in the underworld who wanted to silence him? It's a mystery that's never been solved, and that only adds to his notorious status. Throughout his violent career, Flanery was suspected of taking part in the killings of several gang members and even police informants. He was a cold, calculating figure, earning the respect and fear of those in the criminal world. But even though he was never officially caught for most of his crimes, his name became synonymous with the darkest corners of Sydney's crime scene. Years later, Flanery's story remains shrouded in mystery. The last confirmed sighting of him was in the 1980s, and since then, he's never been found. Was he killed, or is he still out there somewhere? We may never know, but his reign of terror is forever etched into Australia's criminal history. Number 6, Cory Brennan might not be a name that's as famous as some of Australia's most notorious criminals, but his story is just as chilling. A guy with a serious temper and no control, Brennan's life took a dark turn after a violent outburst that would change everything. Brennan, once a member of a small-time gang, was known for his short fuse and violent tendencies. But it was a crime in 2009 that really put him on the map. After getting into an argument with a family, things escalated, and Brennan ended up stabbing a man to death in cold blood. This wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment thing, it was calculated and brutal. The shocking part? Brennan didn't show any remorse at all. Instead, he went about his life like it was just another day. But his violent actions didn't stop there. After the murder, Brennan went on to commit even more acts of violence, leading to his arrest and conviction. He was sentenced to a hefty 33 years in prison, which was a relief for the public, who feared what else he might do if left unchecked. What makes Brennan stand out from other criminals is the chilling fact that he seemed almost unfazed by the violence he caused. He didn't just kill in a fit of rage, he did it with cold calculation. And while there's talk of him having a chance at rehabilitation, many feel that someone like Brennan, who shows no signs of remorse, should never be allowed back into society. Brennan's story is a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones who don't show their true nature until it's too late. Number 5. Daniel Holden's story is one that'll make you rethink everything you know about violence and evil. This guy didn't just snap. He was a ticking time bomb, and when he exploded, it left everyone in shock. In 2009, Holden was involved in a brutal and unprovoked attack on a young man. What made it even more chilling was the cold, calculated way he carried out the crime. Holden didn't just get into a fight or lose his temper. He took a knife and stabbed the victim multiple times, leaving him to die in the most horrific way. No remorse, no real reason, just violence for violence's sake. And that's what makes Holden stand out. He was like a predator picking his prey without any obvious motive. The most terrifying part of Holden's story is that it didn't seem like he was acting out of anger or frustration. He was simply enjoying inflicting pain on another person. It's like he got some kind of thrill from it. That's the kind of mentality that makes someone truly dangerous. And it's no surprise that after the murder, people started to see him for what he really was, a cold-blooded killer. Holden was arrested and sentenced to life in prison, but even behind bars, his violent nature didn't disappear. People who've come into contact with him inside the prison system say he's a constant threat. And there's always that lingering fear that one day he might escape or be released back into society. But with his lack of remorse and his violent past, it's safe to say that Holden is one of those criminals who should never be let out. Number 4, James Thomas Raynor was a mastermind behind a series of high-profile robberies, including some of the most daring armed holdups in Australian history. Picture this. He and his gang didn't just sneak in and take what they wanted, they stormed in, guns blazing, and left with millions. He was bold, calculating, and didn't care who he hurt along the way. But it wasn't just about the money for Raynor. He loved the power, the control, and the fear he instilled in others. After several successful robberies, Raynor thought he could continue his criminal empire without anyone catching up with him. But that kind of lifestyle always catches up. He was eventually caught and sent to prison, but even behind bars, Raynor didn't fade into the background. He was involved in a number of prison incidents and kept his connections with the criminal world alive. He showed no remorse for his crimes, which made him even more dangerous. To this day, Ryak remains one of Australia's most feared criminals. With his violent past and the ability to manipulate people, he's the type of person who would never hesitate to hurt anyone who stands in his way. So, while he's behind bars now, don't think for a second that he's forgotten how to control things from inside. Number 3, Graham Henry is not your average guy who made a mistake. This guy is straight out of the criminal playbook. He's dangerous, ruthless, and with a history that'll make anyone shudder. His story isn't about one bad decision. It's about a life spent in and out of crime, with no intention of changing his ways. From the start, Henry showed he wasn't afraid of getting his hands dirty. A career criminal, he became known for his violent tendencies and his ability to manipulate those around him. Henry didn't just commit petty crimes. He was involved in some seriously brutal acts, including armed robberies and even murders. What makes him even more terrifying is that he didn't just do these things in a fit of rage. He planned them, carried them out with cold precision, and didn't seem to care who got hurt in the process. His criminal career finally caught up with him when he was convicted of multiple violent crimes, including the murder of a man during a robbery. But Henry isn't the type to go down without a fight. In prison, he continued to stir up trouble, showing no sign of remorse for his actions. Despite his time behind bars, Henry remains a major figure in the Australian criminal scene. Even today, he's considered one of the most dangerous prisoners around. He's a reminder that some criminals thrive on violence and power, and once they're in the system, they don't easily fade away. Graham Henry isn't just a criminal, he's a force to be reckoned with, and one that Australia hopes will stay locked up for good. Number 2, David McCulloch isn't a name many might recognize, but in the world of Australia's most dangerous criminals, he's a guy no one forgets. His story is one of violence, revenge, and a complete disregard for human life. McCulloch's crimes aren't just shocking, they're downright chilling. It all started with a gang life that led him to commit brutal, calculated acts of violence. McCulloch was part of a dangerous crew that specialized in armed robberies, but it wasn't long before things escalated. He became infamous for his involvement in the violent murder of a man during a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't just about the money for McCulloch. This was personal. After being locked up, McCulloch didn't change his ways. In fact, his prison time seemed to give him even more of a sense of power. He quickly rose through the ranks in the criminal underworld, establishing himself as a serious player. Even behind bars, he continued to pull the strings, influencing the prison system and causing chaos wherever he went. Number 1, Rodney Fuller might not be the first name that comes to mind when you think of Australia's most dangerous criminals, but trust me, his story is one you won't forget. Fuller is the kind of guy who made a name for himself through pure violence and a complete lack of regard for the law. Fuller's criminal career took off with a series of armed robberies that were both ruthless and well-planned. But it wasn't just about getting away with cash. This guy was willing to do whatever it took to intimidate and control the people around him. His ruthless behavior escalated to murder, making him one of the most feared criminals in the country. But here's the twist. Fuller didn't just stop at committing crimes on the outside. His violent nature carried over into his time behind bars. He earned a reputation in prison for being an incredibly dangerous and manipulative figure, often involved in assaults and constantly stirring up trouble. He became infamous for his ability to control inmates through fear, keeping a hold over them, even when locked up. Whether it's through his violent actions on the streets or his influence behind bars, Fuller has a need for control that can't be shaken. Even now, Rodney Fuller is still a threat, known to be involved in gang activity and prison politics. He may have spent time in prison, but his dangerous reputation isn't going away anytime soon.